All right, now there's one other thing that I want to highlight about government intervention, and this is something we've got to be concerned about and worried about always. Just because an optimal tax is possible to correct for this particular problem doesn't mean that the government actually has all of the information it needs in order to set what would be the optimal tax. In our previous schedule, we had numbers clearly written down, all these different possibilities. Even to figure out that schedule of possibilities and what income levels are possible in different levels of grazing is something that the government would have to figure out. It's going to have to collect information somehow to figure out, well, what is the right level of grazing in this particular area? What is the right level of fishing? When is the resource going to be depleted? You know, what is the amount of the common resource? How much fish is in the fishery, for example, where fishing fleets are going out and fishing? How quickly is the fish being depleted? How soon will it be unsustainable, where the fish are completely gone and we can't catch any more fish in that particular area? What's the tipping point? You have to collect lots of data and information, as does the community, if they're going to try to figure out exactly how to regulate and control this particular resource usage. And if the government doesn't get it right, they may set the levels at the wrong level. So for example, go back here, and let's say the government doesn't set a tax of $20 each. Let's say they set a tax of $30 each. No, let's not even do that. Let's say they do it $10 each. Okay, if it's $10 each, then that's going to mean that farming is going to continue up until this level here. And that's still going to be unsustainable. So even though the government has intervened and put a tax into place, it doesn't mean that they've solved the tragedy of the commons problem necessarily, because they may have gotten the information wrong. Okay, and so that's a potential problem. Another problem to be very conscious of is that governments need to get information like this. Where do they get it from? They get it from the people who have the better information, which are going to be the people on the ground, the fishermen themselves, the ranchers themselves. They're going to have to talk to them about what they see going on. And those groups are often going to form simple special interest groups who are going to have incentives to give information to the government that's going to help their case rather than helping the general case. So the government has real problems associated with how it collects information, how it uses it appropriately, and how it makes the appropriate decision to get to the so-called optimal level of production. Now, local fisher people, the fishermen, local ranchers, they know the issue better than the government does generally, especially if you think about a federal government in Washington, D.C., they're often far away from the problems that they're trying to control and affect or regulate. And that means sometimes it's better to have the local fishermen figure out how to do things on their own rather than allowing a government to come in and try to make decisions from the outside. It also poses the problem of interference. Lots of local fishermen might feel like they're being exploited by government regulations that are imposed, maybe in ways that the local fisher people wouldn't even be happy about. Okay, and then that can set up problems with trust in government and so forth. A government tax set at the wrong level could make things worse, like I just suggested before. And these are problems that have to be dealt with. Whenever someone proposes a government solution to something, you have to think about, how does the government acquire the information? How does it know what the right optimal level of intervention is? How do we be sure that the government is making decisions for the larger good rather than simply securing the special interests that are being asked for of them by lobby groups, around the country or in that particular area? Okay, those are all issues that need to be dealt with and are reasonable things for argument in the conversation. Now, one last quote from Eleanor Ostrom, and she just said, "There's no reason to believe that bureaucrats and politicians, no matter how well-meaning they are better at solving problems than the people on the spot who have the strongest incentive to get the solution right." So that's an argument for, at first pass, hopefully get the community involved to form collectively and to try to solve the problem locally rather than trying to solve the problem from above and especially above at the highest level, which is at the federal level rather than the state level. So if you're going to regulate, best to regulate at the community level. If that can't work, state level. If that can't work, then the federal level, rather than going directly to the federal level to try to get regulations on particular things. But the first best, according to her and her analysis, is really to hopefully solve the problems locally with a collective action and agreement among the individuals who are most committed and most involved in that particular resource that's being used for production.